Baruch Hashem, Canada has the vaccine. We're all very excited about that. But tonight I want to talk about a different kind of vaccine. It's something that I call in my classes the bitachon vaccine. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And if you're interested in listening to any of that, you can find it on my podcast. And I am almost finished the series. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And that is really one of the essences of Hanukkah, that the menorah, the lights of the menorah, the 7 lights that we've lit so far are there obviously to remind us of Hashem. They represent the wisdom of the Torah, and they are meant to help us as we go through the darkness of Kislev and enter into the month of Teves. As I said this morning in my class, Doug Ford said that we're finally seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And what I said was that as important as a light at the end of the tunnel is, what we Jews are very good at is finding a light in the tunnel. And that is one of the ideas that we're going to talk about tonight. So I have a lot of questions tonight that I'm going to throw out and we're going to try to answer. So the first question that I want to ask is, when is the proper time to light the candles? Now, you may know the Gemara in Chaf Aleph, which says that the time to light Hanukkah candles, the most efficacious time, the best time, is just when the light is turning to dark, when it begins to get dark. Now, halachically, the reason for that was because the mitzvah of lighting the menorah in the window is for persume nisa, which means to publicize the miracle. And in olden times, especially, first of all, when the day begins to turn to night, that's when the lights will shine their brightest. And secondly, in olden times, that was the time of day when people were typically out on the streets. Because there was no electric lights, people had to get home before it got very dark. It was dangerous to be outside. So we lit the lights exactly when the day was becoming night. But I want to talk to you about the philosophical reason for that. And that's what I want to start with. This is an idea from Rabbi Gamliel Rabinovich. And he talks about the philosophical reason for us lighting the menorah just as it's beginning to, the light to fade into the darkness. And he said, what this is doing is it's meant to teach us about the purpose and message of darkness. Vayehi erev, vayehi boker. And it was evening, and then it was morning. This is how the Torah, how the Jewish people describe a day. It always begins at night, and it goes towards the day. In other words, darkness is always the setting, is always setting the stage for the light to come. It's always the background on which Yeshua, salvation, rescue, will be seen. And not just that, darkness is an important stage that every person goes through in order to see the light, to be able to see the light that will come through. David HaMelech famously said in Tehillim, had I not sat in the darkness, I would not have known the light. Darkness and light, he goes on, actually unites people in their Seder Hayom, in the order of the day. It doesn't matter where in the world, I think this is such a beautiful idea. It doesn't matter where in the world a person is, every single evening comes and morning comes, and even if it's at different times of the day, of the hours, the structure of the day is the same. And Rabbi Rabinovich explains that this is what unites people. Every part of the world goes to sleep and awakes. And this structure unites people. And in terms of the metaphor of darkness and light, every person goes through difficult times, goes through dark times. And this also unites people. We know that people are closer than ever, for example, in Israel, whenever they are being besieged from the outside, right? Our unity becomes greater. It's true for the whole world, and we've seen that with this pandemic, that when the whole world is going through something together, it has to create more unity. It has to create more of a sense of this interconnection and interdependence. Now, in terms of Hanukkah, it's so interesting because in terms of the Hanukkah story, they find the pach shemen, they find that little flask of oil at the very end of the story. After they've been plunged into darkness for so many years. And the shemen, however, was waiting for them there the whole time. It wasn't lost. It was there. It was there throughout the story, so to speak. But it wasn't found until the end of the story. It wasn't created at the end of the story. It was simply found at the end of the story. In other words, the salvation, the light was there before the darkness. The salvation was there before the pain. The pach shemen was there all along. It just needed to be discovered. The idea is a very well-known saying that God prepares the refuah, the antidote, before the malady. He prepares the cure before the illness. So the solution is there even before the problem came forward. Somebody noted that it's sort of like Zoom, how Zoom was created before the virus, right? Here's a living example that we're experiencing right now. Everybody says, wow, what would we have done without Zoom? But Hashem created the refuah before the makkah. So what does this teach us about Hanukkah? You know, we can't really relate so in any real way to the idea of them finding this pach shemen. It happened a long time ago, but we can notice our own pach shemen. We can notice during our Hanukkah, bayamim hahem bazman hazeh, in those days at this time, right now, our own victories and our own miracles. Now, let me tell you something about human nature. Human nature is such that we get used to pleasure very easily, right? We may be going through a difficult time, but the minute it's over and something good happens, we focus in on that good, and the good is momentary. It may last for a few days, but then it disappears. When everything comes out okay after a difficult situation, we adjust over time and things fade, and we start to take it for granted. The Nes of Hanukkah tells us that we should celebrate our own nissim. We should put them in the center of our Hanukkah. What does that mean? What does this mean practically? For example, that appointment that was so worrisome that I lost so much sleep over, and it turned out to be okay, right? The child that I was worried would never get married, and thank God she finally found her basheret. The child I thought would never grow up and never find his way in life, and look at him, he's finally found his path. And as much as we're so thrilled when those kind of things happen, good experiences are harder for us to hold in our consciousness than the negative. That's the nature of human beings. Negative experiences are like Velcro. They stick to us. They stay in the front of our consciousness. And good memories and good experiences are like Teflon. They seem to just slide right out of our minds a few days, sometimes only a few moments after they're over. And then our minds are filled again with the negative. And this has become because of a very Jewish idea that says the nature of people is to hide the good and expose the bad. We're wired for negativity. We have to work very hard not to go there. I remember Rabbi Noach Weinberg, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, said that we're like a dog being walked that's on a leash and has to stop and sniff in every single hole. And the owner just keeps yanking the dog out of the hole. And he says, it's not a pretty picture, but that's what human beings are like. We are attracted to what is negative. We find it easy to be drawn towards it. But the good and the positive, we enjoy momentarily, and then we let it leave. Bad experiences get stuck. But what Hanukkah comes to teach us is it's telling us to reverse that. Put the positive experiences in the front of your consciousness and let the negative ones slip to the back of your head. And who do we learn this from? We learn this from Hashem himself. In the famous book by I think it's the Ramchal, Tomer Devorah, right? The Palm Tree of Devorah. It's a book that talks about how we are supposed to be like Hashem. And one of the attributes of Hashem, we're told there, is that Hashem remembers the good things that we do. And he's in a place so high up that he wants to allow only the good things about us up there. And when something comes along that's negative and says, I want your attention, God, I want you tattletale on what she did and what he did, God says, I don't want to hear about it. I'm putting that lower down. I'm putting that in the back of my consciousness. I only want the good that people do to be in the front of my consciousness. And that's why Hashem loves when we look for the benefit of the good in others, when we judge others favorably, because we are behaving like Hashem. Oil and water do not go together. Oil, as we know, always floats to the top. And the good that we do always floats to the top of Hashem's consciousness. We need to imitate Hashem by putting our successes and our victories in front of us, in the center. We spend a lot of time beating ourselves up. We spend a lot of time dwelling on negativity and past experiences that were painful, but we need to rewire the negativity and put the positive experiences in the forefront. Somebody tells a story of a newlywed couple who were now in their second year of marriage. And the husband asked the wife, so what did you think? How did you think? How did you like the first year of marriage? So she said, well, I describe it as sweet Gehenna. If you know what Gehenna is, it's the Hebrew word for going the other way. And, you know, of course, he was quite disappointed with that, but she was telling a friend of hers that this is how she would describe it, sweet Gehenna, because of course there were many wonderful moments, but there were also a lot of very painful moments. So what Hanukkah is teaching us to do is extract the positive moments. Hanukkah is the time that we are lehodot, ulahalel, we're thanking Hashem, we're praising Hashem. And the nace of Hanukkah that happened way back then is meant for us today, personally, to appreciate right now what's good in our lives and to put forward positive memories into the year, into the month that's coming ahead of us. Okay, and it's about finding what's already there, right? All of those blessings, all of those positives that are already there, they get lost. But they're always there, just like the Pachshem, and we just have to find them. Okay, so that's my first little message to you. Okay, the next question I have is, why is Hanukkah celebrated more widely than any other holiday? Right? It's not the most important holiday. There are other holidays that are much more important in the Jewish year, and yet 2/3 of American Jews say it's the most important holiday. Now, we all know why they say this, right? If Hanukkah came out in June, I don't know if they'd be celebrating it quite as heartily. But we know that it has a lot to do with the fact that Hanukkah comes out at this time of year. Interestingly, Israelis know that it's not the most important holiday of the year because they live in Israel. And yet 3/4 of Israelis, we are told statistically, do light the menorah. Now, I want to talk to you about an Israeli who's living in America, in North America. This is actually a new friend of mine. I met her in Niagara Falls when we went to Chabad there. My hometown, St. Catharines, is just around the corner. And so the rabbi there and I had a good time discussing the population of St. Catharines. But in any case, when we were there for Shabbos, there was a young Israeli girl there who I befriended. And we've kept up with each other. And she's beginning her journey back to Judaism. She's becoming a Bal Tshuva, Chozeret B'Tshuva. So we've been in touch, and she was working in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which really has no Jews. And now she lives in Edmonton. And she was very distressed before the Yontiv because she was telling me that her Israeli roommates want to put a tree in their apartment. And they keep expressing to her that a tree doesn't mean anything, that nobody believes in this stuff, that it's just a tree and it's pretty and everybody has one. And she came to me and said, what do I do? And I said, honey, knowledge is power. You Google what is the symbol of it, what is the meaning of the tree? And you get some info and you tell them the tree has meaning and we don't want to do this. You have to educate them. So I don't know whether they had the tree or not, but last night I FaceTimed her as she was walking through the mall. She was in a very sad mood. Something had happened. And in the meantime, where was she going? I'm telling you, these Jewish people are amazing. She was walking out of the mall. I think it's probably 30 below zero there, right? She was going to check on her little menorah, which was outside in the snow behind the mall, because I guess they weren't allowed to light it in the store. And she was checking to make sure the candles were still lit, and she was relighting them. Okay. Now, since she was feeling so down, I told her this story that I heard recently to pick her up. And this is how it goes. So it's a story about a young Israeli family. And when the boy was about 14 years old, they moved from Israel to New York. And they happened to move there exactly around this time of year. And he was blown away. Never in his entire life had he ever seen lights like this. I mean, it was incredible. The lights of Manhattan, the lights of New York, the lights everywhere, they were dazzling, they were brilliant. I can't, we all know, about something envy. We all know what that's about, right? Especially if you grow up in a small town where everybody's lit up. And you're going, what's with the little piddly lights in my window, right? Anyway, the point is his family and he were invited to a Hanukkah party outside of New York, a little bit drives away. And they get to the house that they're going to, and there too, the Jewish house, of course, has the little menorah in the window, but everywhere else, all over the street, there's these brilliant, dazzling lights. And he goes into the house and they have their Hanukkah party, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the Hanukkah party, there's a power outage. And of course, I don't have to tell you, every single light on the street is off, and the only lights that still remain lit are the lights of those Hanukkah menorahs, which he now sees dotting the street. As he looks down the street, he notices that there's other Jewish homes on the block. So what I told my Israeli friend is, there's a difference between artificial lights and the real thing. Artificial lights can just go out whenever, but the real thing are sourced by the power of it all, and they never go out. Anyway, she was relieved and happy and was able to continue with her Hanukkah celebration. The next idea I want to share with you. What did we need the miracle of oil for? What did we need that for? Hashem just did this incredible thing for us. He made this tiny little group of yeshiva bacharim, these little skinny guys who sit, I don't know what they look like. He made them win against the mighty Greek army, I mean, we read it, right? Where is it here? You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, etc., 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 right? We read Al Nissim every single night. So the question is, what did he have to do that for? Wasn't that nace totally unnecessary? So I want to quote from Rabbanit Rachel Azulai, who is a Rebbetzin in town at the Sephardic Kollel. And she says, after winning the war, we could have said, that's it. We could have shaken ourselves off and gone back to our old routine. What do we need this miracle of the oil for? Hashem could have arranged for us to find a whole barrel of oil. And then we wouldn't need the miracle of finding one little jug with the Kohen Gadol stamp on it. What was this little extra thing here? And it actually becomes the main thing that we celebrate. So she uses a beautiful analogy. She says, how do you know the difference between, how do you know when it's a mother changing the kid's diaper or the babysitter changing the kid's diaper? I didn't want to say nanny because today, you know, the nannies are like mothers and you might not be able to tell the difference, but let's just say a babysitter that's there for the night, okay? So she says they're going to change the baby differently, right? The woman, the babysitter changes the baby, cleans the baby, then puts the baby back down. And then you know she's the babysitter because the mother would change the baby, clean the baby, and then give it a big kiss. And only after that put it down. So she goes on to say, Hashem would have saved us from the Greeks because he had to. He had to, right? He promised the Jewish people that we're going to survive forever, that we're an eternal nation. He had to rescue us. But he gave us the miracle of the oil in addition, which was totally extra, to show us how much he loves us. That was the kiss. That was the kiss we got from the Yiddish mama. That was the kiss that we got that shows that he loves us, just like the mother who kisses the child when she changes him. And why did we need this kiss? What was this miracle of the oil all about? Why was it so necessary to give us that extra kiss? So we know that historically, 200 years before, when Hanukkah happened, 200 years later, after the Hanukkah story, the Jews were going to go into exile. It was the end of a period in Jewish history where there would no longer be prophecy, there would no longer be open miracles, and the Jewish people were going to be leaving and going out into the dark exile. And so Hashem wanted to make sure we left with a kiss. As a matter of fact, we all know that the holiday of Hanukkah is not in the Torah. It was instituted by the rabbis at that time who felt that it was so important that we take this kiss with us into exile that they instituted this holiday called Hanukkah. Right? We know that Purim and Hanukkah are the only two rabbinic holidays. All the other holidays are written about in the Torah. So what does it mean for us tonight? We're leaving Kislev behind. We're on the second last night of Hanukkah. We're leaving the darkest month of the year and we're going into Teves, which still has its challenges. We're still in the pandemic. We're still in the middle of the winter. And what can we do to take the light and the lessons of Hanukkah with us into this darkness ahead? How can we bring the miraculous into the mundane, so to speak? So I want to talk a little bit about my favorite topic right now, which is we need to take the bitachon vaccine. That's right. I hope you all get the other vaccine, but whether you do or you don't, more important than that one is the bitachon vaccine. And that's what Hanukkah teaches us. Quickly, if you want to hear more about bitachon, like I said, you can tune into the classes. What is bitachon? Bitachon is, simply put, emunah that is translated into action. Many people believe in God, but their actions do not necessarily demonstrate that belief. The story of Hanukkah reveals people who took that belief, put their money where their mouth is, as we like to say, right? It didn't remain theoretical, but they actually exercised and flexed that bitachon muscle. They took the bitachon vaccine and they ran with it to see what would happen. And I want to tell you a little bit about what did happen. First of all, the first thing we know about bitachon is God expects action. It's not about just sitting around and saying, God, help me, save me, let me win the lottery. Oh yeah, I didn't buy a ticket. Oh well, right? The point is God expects us to do something. We know this. We know this from so many stories in the Torah, right? The famous splitting of the sea. Nachshon ben Aminadav, he jumps in, and only when the water is at his nose does God split the sea. Basya bas Paro, she reaches out to grab that Hebrew baby that's in the Nile River, and she can't reach him. But she reaches with all her strength, that Hashem does a miracle and stretches out her arm, and she's able to pull the baby in. And finally, the Hashmonaim, fighting the Greeks. What a crazy thing to do. But they said, we have no choice. We put our trust in Hashem and we will act, and we'll see what Hashem does. Hopefully he'll do the rest. But the second part of this equation of bitachon is to be very careful, because a lot of times people fool themselves. They believe they do have bitachon, but maybe not. And I'll give you an example straight from the Hanukkah story, which I've never come across before. But it says that when the beginnings of the fight, that was the beginnings of the stirrings of the Greeks wanting to destroy the Jews, when it first started to happen, one of the decrees that the Greeks made was that every Jewish girl who was betrothed to be married would first have to be in relations with a Greek general. And so Yochanan, Kohen Gadol, his daughter, was going to be married. They were already hiding out in the caves. And the Greek officers got wind of this, and they were sent from headquarters. And they literally, it's described in Rav Brevda's book, they literally put down a Sefer Torah on the ground in front of the father and the brothers and began doing what they needed to do according to the law. Meanwhile, it says there that the Jews, the Hashmonaim, they look to the east for help. And the commentators there say, what does this mean? The east, isn't that Jerusalem? Isn't that a reference to God? No, the east referred to these marauding Persians that happened to be passing by, who were also enemies of the Greeks. And they were hoping that the Persians would swoop in and help them. And they made a mistake. And the chief among them says, you know what it says in the Torah? It says, cursed is the one who relies on man, and blessed is the one who relies on God. We can't look to the other people to help us, just like we say in Hallel. Don't put your trust in the nobles. Don't put your trust in the people around you. Put your trust completely in God. And so they said, we have no choice but to act. And they understood that their help, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where does my help come? My help comes from the one who is the maker of heaven and earth, right? And they began to fight, and that's when things turned around and they began to win. It's just interesting that even the words in the Ala Nissim prayer show that it's not they who were fighting, but that God was fighting for them, right? It says, it doesn't talk about them at all. It says that you took up their grievance. You judged their claim. You avenged the wrong. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure. There's 5 different places where it talks about what God does to them. The wicked into the hands of the righteous, etc. The wanton into the hands of the students of Torah. The Jewish people were doing nothing. God, you did it all. Now, why is this an important piece for trust in Hashem? The other piece of trusting in Hashem is that we have to be careful, as I said, not to put our trust in other things. So the Hashmonaim, at first, we're going to put their trust in the Persians, and we read about Yosef in Parshas Vayeshev, always in connection to Hanukkah. We read at the end of the Parsha how Yosef put his trust into the wine steward, right? The wine steward, Yosef had interpreted his dream successfully. He was leaving prison, and Yosef says to him 2 times, remember me to Paro, don't forget to put in a good word for me. And because of that, because of saying that twice, Yosef is punished measure for measure with 2 extra years in jail, because a person on his level was considered to be lacking in this character trait of bitachon. So we have to be so careful that we don't rely on others. And also, that we don't rely on ourselves. The Al Nissim prayer emphasizes what God did for us, because what it's teaching us is that our talents and skills can actually be a detriment, because we can say, Kochi va'otzem yadi, I did it. The strength and the power of my hands accomplished this. It was my brilliance. It was my money. It was my connections. It was that doctor that knows me, and so he did it for me, etc. And we learned that when you feel vulnerable about your weaknesses, you hand it over to Hashem. And yes, your chance of success is much more likely when you do this. Shlomo HaMelech wrote in Kohelet, in the Ecclesiastes, I have seen something under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. In other words, a fast runner can trip just before he reaches the finish line. A wealthy man can lose everything in a moment, in a bad deal. So the message of this part of the bitachon is that the more we recognize the limits of our own strengths and talents and skills, the more we rely on Hashem and let him make the results successful the way that we want them to be. Okay, last question. I hope I'm not going on too long, but we'll just finish with this. So the last question is one of the most famous questions that's asked about Hanukkah. Maybe you already know what it is. Why do we light 8 candles? There were only 7 nights that were miraculous. There was enough oil for one night. So what was miraculous about the first night? Now there's hundreds of answers to this question, but I want to focus on one. And before we answer it, I want to ask another question that goes together with it. If you look in any siddur, whether it's Shabbos, Yantiv, whatever, well, it wouldn't be Yantiv. You're always going to find Modim Anachnu Lach, the prayer that we say, the thanksgiving prayer that we bow to Hashem and we thank him for the fact that every moment of every day he trusts our lives to us, that he gives us our life, and that he puts souls into us, that he performs miracles with us every day. He gives us wonders and favors in every season, evening, morning, and afternoon. His compassion is never exhausted, and he's constantly giving us kindnesses, and therefore we should put our hope in him. And this prayer is always followed by Al Hanissim. So my son was saying to me, people get so excited to say Al Hanissim, God, wow, you did so many miracles. You do so much for us. Look at all the stuff you did for us. Wow. Right? Because miracles like that are like fireworks. It's like a great sound and light show. Look at that. The oil lasted for 8 days. Look at that. This small little army defeated the mighty Greeks. But he says, when people say Modim, it's not that exciting. It's like, another day. Yeah, got up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head, whatever the words are. Nothing so exciting. He says, really, the kunst is to say Modim with excitement. Say it with the same excitement that you say Al Hanissim. Because the truth is the fact that first light. Why do we light 8 candles, even though the miracle was only 7? Because we say that the fact that oil lights is miraculous. That there are miracles that are all around us that we call hidden miracles, nes nistar, as opposed to nes nigla, open miracles. And they're the ones that are the hardest to find. They're the ones that slip to the back of our consciousness. They're the ones that if we don't work hard to dig deeper and find that light and find all the goodness and cherish those wonderful moments when we found out that the doctor's prognosis was wrong, that my child ended up, yes, being a success, even though all the teachers said he's never going to get anywhere, etc. Those are the times when we have to draw on this. Famous story in the Gemara of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa that I just have to tell. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was a great sage of the Jewish people. It was Hanukkah time. He was very, very poor, and they didn't have any oil to light the menorah. And he said to his daughter, go get me some vinegar. And vinegar they had, I guess it was cheaper. And his daughter said to her father as she went to do his bidding, she said, but Daddy, Tati, Abba, vinegar doesn't light. And Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who was on such a high level, such a high spiritual level, says to her, the same God that says oil should light can also say vinegar can light, can also say vinegar should light. In other words, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa understood that for Hashem, there is no difference between the natural and the supernatural, that they are all the same to Hashem. So we're all very wealthy. The word ashir, wealth, stands for einayim, eyes, shenayim, teeth, yadayim, the yud is for yadayim, and the resh is for raglayim, feet, hands and feet. Anybody who has these four things, the word ashir, wealth, is teaching us you are a very wealthy person. So if we can focus on these wonderful things to be grateful for, and finally, if we can recognize that the Pach Shemen, sorry, let me just finish this off. That the light, that going back to the beginning of this talk, that the light comes against the backdrop of darkness. That darkness is necessary to go through in order to appreciate the light. Darkness is always the prelude to light. And that the oil that was found during the time of Hanukkah was found after a very dark period. But the truth is it was never lost. It just had to be discovered. So my blessing to all of us and all of you here is that we all continue to discover our own light and use it to light our candle and those of others around us to dispel the darkness and bring the light ever closer. Thank you for listening, and thank you for allowing me to speak for CyberSound.
Thank you so much, Devorah. Thank you for agreeing to speak for us and coming again and leaving us with so many messages that I'm sure everybody will take home something that's particular to them, but all of them we will all keep in our back pockets. Oh, yes, to celebrate. Thank you.